Commander James Harrison stood in the observation deck of Outpost Kepler 442b, watching something that made his entire military career seem meaningless. The creature in front of him was so large that it could crush the entire station with a single step. Its body was covered in thick, gray skin that looked like the surface of an ancient mountain. Every movement it made caused the ground to shake. Soldiers around him spoke in hushed voices, fear clear in their words. "Sir, we have a problem," said Lieutenant Emily Foster, her voice crackling through the communication device. She was in the command center below, monitoring all the weapons and defense systems. "Every single attack we have tried has failed. The creature does not even seem to notice our weapons. The missiles bounce off like toys. The laser cannons do nothing. It is as if the thing is completely immune to everything we have." Harrison did not respond immediately. He was watching the creature move across the barren, dusty landscape. It was walking slowly, almost peacefully, as if it had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. Its footsteps created waves in the dust that looked like small earthquakes. Birds, if they existed on this planet, would have fled long ago. Even the wind seemed to avoid it. "Send Battalion 7 in," Harrison finally ordered. His voice was firm, the voice of a man who had made difficult decisions before. "Tell them to engage with heavy artillery." Within minutes, 100 soldiers arrived in armored vehicles. They were the best warriors the coalition had trained. Each one of them had years of combat experience. Each one of them had fought against impossible odds and survived. They had weapons that could destroy fortified cities. They had technology that most civilizations in the galaxy would never see. But as they faced this creature, none of that mattered. The soldiers opened fire. The sounds of explosions filled the air. Orange flames lit up the gray sky. Smoke rose in thick clouds from where the weapons hit the creature's body. For a moment, Harrison thought they might actually succeed. Perhaps, just perhaps, this thing could be stopped. Then the smoke cleared. The creature was still there, completely unhurt. Its thick skin had protected it completely. The artillery fire had done nothing. Not even a scratch appeared on its massive body. The soldiers stopped firing, realizing the truth that Harrison was also coming to accept. Their weapons simply did not work. "Order them to retreat," Harrison said quietly. "Tell them to fall back to the base." The soldiers returned, their faces showing defeat. This was not a normal war. This was not something that could be solved with military force and tactical thinking. The creature continued walking, still moving slowly, still showing no sign of aggression. It simply existed, and that existence alone was a threat. Over the next few days, more battalions came. Warriors from different worlds arrived with different weapons, different tactics, and different technologies. The Zarthian soldiers brought weapons that bent time itself. The Krell brought energy cannons that could melt metal from kilometers away. The humans from Earth brought their most advanced machines and their best commanders. Nothing worked. The creature defeated every attack not by fighting back, but simply by being too strong to be hurt. Slowly, the soldiers began to fear not just the creature, but the feeling of helplessness. They were warriors trained to fight, trained to win, trained to believe that strength and tactics could overcome any problem. But this creature showed them that sometimes, no amount of strength matters. Sometimes, the universe contains things so far beyond human understanding that military power becomes useless. The creature came to be called the Leviathan. Scientists studied it from a distance, trying to understand what it was, where it came from, and why it had come to this planet. Nobody knew the answers. It had simply appeared one day, emerging from deep underground, and walked onto the surface. It did not attack the outpost, but it did not leave either. It just stayed there like a living mountain, waiting for something that nobody could understand. Commander Harrison walked through the outpost, seeing the fear in the eyes of his soldiers. He saw tension in their shoulders. He heard worry in their whispers when they thought he was not listening. This was worse than any battle he had faced before. In a real battle, you could fight back. You could develop strategy and tactics. You could use your strength and intelligence to overcome your enemy. But what do you do when your enemy cannot be hurt? What do you do when the greatest power in the galaxy means nothing against something so far beyond your understanding? Days turned into weeks. The military tried everything they could think of. They tried talking to the creature through speakers, broadcasting messages in every language known to the coalition. The creature did not respond. They tried luring it away with food and with sounds and with light. Nothing worked. They tried sending scientists and philosophers and the smartest people in the galaxy. The creature ignored them all. It simply remained on the dusty plains, waiting, existing, being the most powerful thing anyone had ever seen. The morale at the outpost began to break. Some soldiers started to refuse orders. Others requested transfers to different stations. Officers began to argue among themselves about what should be done next. Command sent message after message to coalition headquarters, asking for instructions, asking for help, asking for anything that might solve this impossible problem. But nobody had answers. Nobody had faced a situation like this before. And through it all, the Leviathan remained. Patient, powerful, alone. Then one day something unexpected happened. Something that would change everything. Something that nobody could have predicted would come from the most unlikely place in the entire outpost. Something that would start to bridge the gap between the humans and the most terrifying creature any of them had ever seen. Marcus Wells did not know that the world was ending. He was too busy sweeping the floor of Corridor 7 to notice the emergency sirens that had started wailing through the lower levels of Outpost Kepler 442b. He moved his mop back and forth in the same smooth, practiced motions he had perfected over 7 years of work. Left to right, forward and back. The movements were so familiar that his mind could wander while his body worked automatically. Nobody ever came to Corridor 7. It was one of the oldest parts of the station, filled with storage rooms and maintenance areas that the important people never needed to visit. The important people, the officers and scientists and soldiers, they all stayed in the upper levels where the windows looked out at the stars and where decisions were made that affected entire civilizations. Down here, in the lower levels, Marcus was alone with the hum of machinery and the gentle sound of water running through old pipes. The sirens continued their wailing, but Marcus did not stop working. He had learned long ago that emergencies rarely affected people like him. He was a janitor, a maintenance worker, a person whose name appeared on no important lists and whose work was noticed only when something was dirty or broken. The military crisis happening above had nothing to do with him. His job was to keep these corridors clean, to make sure the machines kept running, to be invisible and useful in equal measure. His gray uniform was worn soft from years of washing. The name patch on his chest read M. Wells in fading letters. Nobody called him Marcus. They called him janitor, or maintenance, or sometimes just ignored him completely. He had grown comfortable with this invisibility. There was a strange peace in knowing that you did not matter very much, that your mistakes would be small and your successes would go unnoticed. It meant you could simply work and not worry about the weight of the world. The emergency broadcast finally reached the lower levels, crackling through the old speakers that Marcus had cleaned at least 1,000 times. All non-essential personnel report to emergency shelters immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all non-essential personnel report to emergency shelters. A potential threat has been identified on the surface. Remain in designated safe zones until further notice. Marcus stopped sweeping. He looked at his mop, at the bucket of dirty water, at the corridor that stretched before him in both directions. Non-essential personnel. That was him. He was about as non-essential as a person could possibly be. Nobody would miss him if he disappeared. Nobody would notice if he did not show up to work tomorrow. He was the kind of person that the outpost could easily replace with another janitor who would do exactly the same work. Still, he followed the instructions. He put his mop and bucket into the equipment closet, moving slowly, taking his time. There was no reason to rush. The emergency shelters were always crowded, filled with people who wanted to talk and ask questions. Marcus preferred silence. He preferred to be alone. But regulations were regulations, and even a janitor had to follow them. Before heading to the shelter, Marcus decided to check the food storage area. It was part of his regular routine to make sure everything was organized and clean. If he was going to be leaving soon, he might as well make sure the work was done properly. A janitor's work was never really finished, but it was important to do what you could before the day ended. The food storage area was in complete chaos. Boxes were scattered everywhere. Packages had been left open and partially empty. Someone had been in a hurry, grabbing what they could and leaving the rest in disorder. It was the kind of mess that bothered Marcus deeply. He could not stand to see things out of place, could not bear to leave work undone. He began to organize. Box by box, he returned things to their proper shelves. He checked dates on packages, removing expired items and placing fresh supplies in front. His hands moved with the same practiced efficiency that had served him well for 7 years. The work was mindless, which was exactly what Marcus liked about it. No thinking required. No decisions to make. Just order being restored from chaos, which felt like the most important thing in the world right now. As he worked, his hand stopped on a large loaf of bread. It was the kind of bread that took time to make, the kind that required patience and care. The date label read, "Expires today." Marcus picked it up carefully as if it might break. The bread was still soft, still fresh. It felt warm in his hands, though that was probably just his imagination. For a moment, Marcus was not standing in a storage room at an alien outpost. He was standing in his mother's kitchen on Earth, watching her pull a fresh loaf from the oven. She had made bread almost every week, filling their small apartment with a smell that Marcus still remembered perfectly, even though she had been gone for 20 years. She used to say that bread was one of the few things that connected all of humanity, that no matter what world you lived on or what language you spoke, breaking bread with someone meant you were choosing peace. Marcus had not thought about that in a very long time. He had not thought about many things from his past. It was easier to focus on the present, on the work that needed to be done, on the simple task of keeping the outpost clean. He tucked the loaf under his arm. The emergency shelter could wait a little longer. Something was pulling him toward the observation windows, toward the upper levels where people were probably panicking and running around. Marcus did not usually break his routine. He did not usually do things that were outside his normal work schedule. But something about this day was different. Something about carrying this bread made him feel like he needed to see what was happening. He walked toward the upper levels, the bread still tucked under his arm, not knowing that this simple action would change everything. Marcus stepped out onto the surface of Kepler 442b, and immediately his suit sensors came alive with warnings. The atmospheric pressure was lower than the station's comfortable environment. The temperature was cold, colder than anything Marcus had ever experienced on Earth. The radiation levels were higher than recommended for extended exposure. Everything about this place was hostile to human life. Without the suit, Marcus would have been dead in minutes. But Marcus barely noticed the warnings. His entire attention was fixed on the creature before him. The Leviathan filled his entire vision. It was so large that Marcus could not see all of it at once. His eyes could take in the massive chest, the thick legs that looked like buildings, the long neck that stretched up toward the sky. But the head was too high to see clearly, hidden somewhere above the clouds. Marcus felt smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. He was like an ant standing before a mountain. He was like a drop of water looking up at an ocean. The creature's breathing was the sound of distant thunder. Each exhale sent waves of air across the dusty surface, pushing small stones and dust particles across the ground. Marcus felt the force of it even through his protective suit. This was power. This was something that existed beyond human understanding. This was what it meant to be truly small. Soldiers shouted at him through his communication device. "Wells, get back inside immediately. You are in direct violation of safety protocols. Return to the station now." The voices were angry, confused, desperate. Marcus ignored them all. He could turn off the communication if he wanted to, but he did not bother. What did it matter? He was already here. He was already standing in front of something impossible. The creature's eye moved. Marcus could see it now, a massive orb that caught the light of the distant sun. The eye was as large as a building, and inside it, Marcus could see something that surprised him. He expected to see hunger or rage or the cold indifference of an animal. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like sadness. The eye of the Leviathan was watching him, and in that watching, Marcus felt a strange connection, as if this impossible creature had noticed him as an individual for the first time. Without thinking about what he was doing, Marcus raised his arm. The loaf of bread was still tucked under his other arm, but now he broke off a piece, holding it up toward the sky. The bread looked impossibly small compared to the creature. It was like offering a grain of sand to someone standing on a beach. But Marcus held it anyway, his arm shaking slightly from the weight of what he was doing. The creature's massive head began to descend. It moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid that any sudden movement might break the fragile moment that had formed between them. The head came down, 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 until it was lower than the buildings of the outpost. The eye was now at Marcus's level, watching him with an intensity that made him feel naked and exposed. Marcus's heart was racing. Every part of his training, every part of common sense, was screaming at him to run, to get away, to return to safety. But his feet remained planted firmly on the ground. His arm remained raised, holding the piece of bread. He did not move. The creature's breathing changed. The sound of distant thunder became softer, less aggressive. The massive jaws opened, revealing a mouth that could have swallowed the entire outpost in a single gulp. But instead of attacking, instead of consuming Marcus in one quick motion, the creature did something gentle. Its mouth moved toward the bread with careful precision, and the piece disappeared inside. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature simply held Marcus's gaze, its eye reflecting something that the janitor could not quite understand. Then, slowly, the massive head tilted slightly. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps gratitude, or maybe something beyond human language altogether. Marcus broke off another piece of bread. This time there was no hesitation. He understood now. This creature was not a weapon. This creature was not an enemy. This creature was simply alone. Just like he was. Again and again Marcus offered pieces of bread. Each time, the creature accepted with the same gentleness, the same care. The massive jaws that could crush mountains moved with surprising delicacy. The eye that had seemed so terrifying now seemed sad, tired, as if it had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Above, soldiers watched from behind reinforced walls. Cameras recorded everything. Scientists began analyzing the footage, making notes, asking questions that would take weeks to answer. But down on the dusty surface, there was only Marcus and the Leviathan, connected by the simple act of sharing food. The bread ran out. Marcus held up his empty hands and the creature's head tilted again. This time the gesture seemed to carry a different meaning. It was not disappointment. It was something more like peace. The creature remained close to Marcus, its massive body towering over him, but there was no threat in its presence. There was only companionship, a strange and impossible friendship that had formed between two beings who had both learned what it meant to be utterly, completely alone. For the first time in 7 years, Marcus did not feel invisible. For the first time since arriving at this distant outpost, he felt like he mattered. And for the first time since it had arrived on this planet, the Leviathan had found something that looked like understanding. Commander Harrison sat in the conference room, staring at the footage on the large screen before him. The video showed Marcus Wells, a janitor whose file contained almost no information worth noting, standing face to face with the most dangerous creature in known space. And instead of fighting, instead of running, the man was feeding it bread. Actual bread. The absurdity of it made Harrison want to laugh and cry at the same time. "Play it again," he ordered, his voice tired. The footage rewound and played once more. Marcus holding up the bread. The creature descending. The gentle acceptance. It was impossible, and yet it was happening right before their eyes. "Sir, we need to make a decision," said Dr. Rachel Mitchell, the outpost's lead xenobiologist. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to see things others missed. "This changes everything we know about that creature. Whatever it is, it responds to Marcus Wells. It does not respond to weapons, commands, or scientific instruments. But it responds to him." "So what are you suggesting, Doctor?" Harrison asked, though he already knew the answer. "I am suggesting we keep Marcus Wells in contact with the creature. We use him as a bridge between us and the Leviathan. We need to understand what it is, why it is here, and what it wants. Right now, Marcus is our only communication channel. Over the next few days, the military protocol at Outpost Kepler 442b changed completely. For the first time since the creature arrived, weapons were not pointed at it. Instead, Marcus Wells was given supplies and told to continue his strange ritual. Every morning he would walk out onto the surface with bread. Every morning the creature would accept it from his hands. Scientists watched from a distance, recording every moment, taking notes, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to have no solution. Marcus himself did not understand what was happening. He was told to continue doing what he had done once, to repeat the action that had somehow calmed the most terrifying creature anyone had ever seen. He followed the orders not because he was a soldier or because he understood the importance of his work, but simply because it was what he was being asked to do. Marcus had spent 7 years doing what he was asked, and he saw no reason to stop now. But slowly something changed. As the days passed and Marcus continued to visit the creature with bread, he began to notice things that the scientists in their laboratories could never see. He noticed that the creature seemed to prefer certain kinds of bread over others. He noticed that it would sometimes lower its head to watch Marcus as he walked, following his movements across the dusty landscape. He noticed that the creature's breathing would become lighter and calmer when Marcus was near, and would become heavy and troubled when he left. One day Dr. Mitchell came to Marcus with a question that changed everything. "Why bread?" she asked. "Out of all the things in the galaxy, why did you choose to feed it bread?" Marcus thought about this for a long time. He stood in the observation room, looking out at the creature that was resting peacefully on the dusty ground. "It reminded me of home," he said finally. "My mother used to bake bread when I was a child. She said that bread was something that meant peace. She said that when you shared bread with someone, you were choosing to be their friend instead of their enemy." Dr. Mitchell's eyes widened. She rushed back to the command center and began analyzing everything they knew about the creature. She looked at its behavior patterns, its movements, the way it had arrived on the planet. She studied ancient records and scientific databases from civilizations across the galaxy. Days turned into weeks as she worked, barely sleeping, driven by a sudden understanding that was starting to take shape. Finally, she called another meeting with Commander Harrison. "I think I have figured it out, sir," she said, her voice filled with excitement and sadness. "The creature is not attacking us because it cannot attack us. It came to this planet because it is searching for something. Based on its size, its age as determined by our analysis, and its behavior patterns, I believe the Leviathan is the last of its kind. It is alone. It has been alone for possibly thousands of years." Harrison felt something shift inside his chest. "You are saying it is not a weapon. It is not a threat." "No, sir," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "It is a refugee. It is a lonely creature that came here hoping to find others like itself. Instead, it found an outpost filled with armed soldiers who tried to destroy it. And then it found Marcus Wells, who offered it something far more valuable than weapons could ever take away. It offered it friendship." The information spread through the military command structure like wildfire. Orders changed. The coalition sent messages to all their member worlds. Instead of preparing for war, they began preparing for something entirely different. They began preparing to help. Marcus continued his daily ritual with the bread, but now scientists worked beside him, learning everything they could about the creature. They began to develop a plan. If the Leviathan was searching for its own kind, the coalition would help with that search. They had technology and resources that could scan vast sections of space. They had the ability to travel to distant worlds and search for any sign of the creature's civilization. One morning, Marcus walked out to meet the creature as usual, but this time he was not alone. Dr. Mitchell walked beside him, holding a device that could translate complex sounds into understandable language. When the creature made its deep, rumbling sounds, the device translated them into words that humans could understand. The creature was not speaking a language exactly, but it was communicating. It was expressing a longing, a need, a hope that had kept it alive through countless ages of loneliness. "It wants to go home," Dr. Mitchell said, tears in her eyes. "It is asking us for help to find its way home." Marcus looked up at the creature's massive eye, and for the first time he smiled. "We will help you," he said, speaking directly to the creature even though it could not understand his words. "You are not alone anymore." The construction of the expedition ship took 6 months. It was the largest vessel ever built by the coalition, designed specifically to accommodate the Leviathan's massive body. Engineers from 12 different worlds worked together, combining their knowledge and technology to create something that had never existed before. The ship would be capable of traveling through space, carrying the creature safely across the vast distances between stars, searching for any sign of others like it. Marcus watched the construction from the observation deck, seeing the enormous ship take shape piece by piece. Workers moved like tiny insects across its surface, welding metal, installing systems, testing equipment. The ship was beautiful in a way that Marcus had never associated with machinery before. It was a ship built not for war, not for conquest, but for hope. It was built to bring someone home. During those months, Marcus continued his daily visits to the creature. The routine had become sacred to both of them. Marcus would walk out with bread, and the Leviathan would accept it with the same gentle care it had shown from the beginning. They had developed a language that existed beyond words. Marcus would place his hand on the creature's massive chest and feel its heartbeat, powerful and steady. The creature would lower its head and rest it close to Marcus, as close as it could without accidentally harming the small human. Dr. Mitchell spent those months learning to communicate more deeply with the creature. She discovered that it had a name, a sound so deep and complex that no human voice could produce it. The scientists simply called it Atlas, though the creature itself seemed to prefer the designation that meant, the one who remembers. It remembered its home, remembered other members of its kind, remembered a world of beauty and complexity that existed somewhere beyond the stars. Atlas showed them pictures in its mind, images that Dr. Mitchell could somehow translate through the device. There was a world of enormous mountains and deep oceans. There were others like Atlas, vast and powerful and wise. There was a civilization that had existed for millions of years, peaceful and advanced beyond anything the coalition had ever encountered. And then something happened. Atlas did not know what. There was a disaster, a catastrophe, something that scattered its people across the galaxy. Atlas had been searching for them ever since, alone and wandering, until it found Earth's outpost on Kepler 442b. The day of departure arrived on a morning when the sky was clear and bright. The massive expedition ship stood ready, its engines humming with power, its systems prepared for the journey ahead. The entire outpost gathered to watch. Soldiers stood in formation. Scientists and workers filled the observation decks. Marcus stood at the front, alone, holding a freshly baked loaf of bread that he had made himself. He had taught himself to bake during those 6 months. At first, his attempts were terrible, the bread hard and inedible. But slowly, with practice and patience, he learned the skill that his mother had possessed. He learned how to feel the dough, how to know when it was ready, how to create something warm and nourishing from simple ingredients. The bread became his way of speaking when words were not enough. Atlas emerged from the temporary shelter where it had been resting. It moved slowly, carefully, aware of the attention it was receiving. Its massive body crossed the space between the outpost and the expedition ship. Workers guided it gently, not with weapons or commands, but with respect and care. This was not a prisoner being transported. This was not a threat being contained. This was a being honored, being helped, being given a chance to find its way home. Marcus walked forward to meet the creature one final time before it boarded the ship. He stood before the massive eye that had become so familiar to him, and he held up the bread. Atlas lowered its head, and Marcus placed the loaf gently in the creature's mouth. This time the creature did not simply consume it. It held the bread, understanding its meaning, understanding what Marcus was trying to say without words. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, though his voice was too small for anyone to hear. "Thank you for letting me be your friend." Atlas made a sound, deep and resonant, a vibration that seemed to pass through the earth itself. When the device translated it, the words were simple but profound. "You were not alone. I was not alone. We found each other." Then, slowly and carefully, the Leviathan walked up the massive ramp that led into the expedition ship. Its footsteps echoed across the landscape one final time. Scientists and workers watched from safe distances as the creature took its place inside the vessel. The ramp rose. The doors sealed. The ship began to prepare for departure. Commander Harrison approached Marcus, who stood still and silent, watching the ship. "We have offers for you," Harrison said. "Positions in our research division. Titles, recognition, funding to pursue any project you wish. You have done something extraordinary, Wells. You have changed the course of history." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I do not want any of that," he said quietly. "I want to stay here. I want to continue my work. I want to be ready if Atlas comes back. I want to help any other lonely creatures that might find their way to this place." Harrison studied the man for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. We will leave you here with a small team of scientists and support staff. You will be the station's cultural liaison. It is not a high rank, but it is important work." The expedition ship rose from the ground, its engines creating a sound like thunder. It lifted higher and higher until it was no more than a point of light against the stars. Then it jumped through a wormhole and disappeared into the vast expanse of space, carrying Atlas toward home. Marcus returned to his quarters and began to bake another loaf of bread. Not from obligation this time, but from hope. Somewhere out there, Atlas was traveling through the stars, searching for its kind. And when the creature found them, when it finally reached home, it would remember that it had not been entirely alone. It would remember a small human who had offered it bread and friendship when the entire universe seemed to be against it. Marcus understood something now that he had never understood before. Being invisible did not mean being unimportant. Being forgotten did not mean being worthless. Sometimes, the smallest gesture, the simplest act of kindness, could change everything. Sometimes, the most meaningful victories were won not with weapons or power, but with bread and compassion and the willingness to see another being's loneliness and answer it with understanding. The war that never was had become history's greatest triumph, not because anyone had won, but because someone had chosen to listen instead of fight, to offer friendship instead of fear, to break bread instead of break bones.